Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. Jesus prayed that all may be one. How's that going for you? About as well as this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you, I suspect. Right? Hang on a minute. So, first of all, those words might sound vaguely, distantly familiar to you because you heard them 4 weeks ago, I think, sometime in Easter. It was one of the readings in Easter. We read from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, so you probably understood it more clearly. We don't talk like that anymore. So it's important that we recognize, I think, what's at the heart of the message and not the language, get tied up in the language too easily. Oddly enough, that is actually the point here, what's at the heart of things. I love the Gospel of John. We've talked about the Gospel of John a bit in the last little while and pointed out that it is the one that is most likely to be the least reliably accurate when it comes to talking about Jesus, at least in the narrative sense. The other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were all a little bit closer to the time, a little bit closer to the source, and they're much more narrative in nature. I mean, each of them has their own sort of spin on things, obviously, but they're much more narrative in nature. John, on the other hand, whoever wrote the Gospel of John, whether it was a guy named John or Fred or whatever, or whether it was more than one person, we don't really know for sure. But what we do know with some relative certainty is that it was much later. In other words, the author of the Gospel of John had time to think about it, and clearly did. They had time to experience the first years of the followers of Jesus, being the followers of Jesus. They had time to wonder about the message and how it was being lived out. I think that's one of the best things about the Gospel of John. I love the language, I love the metaphor. It's full of metaphors, isn't it? And it's not just a narrative about the life of Jesus in that very sort of, that way that's usually separated by a dash, right? This date to this date. It even begins, it begins at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word. It takes us right back to the very beginning. And then towards the end, it takes us somewhere else. Because it doesn't just narrate the life of Jesus. It talks about Jesus and what Jesus is and what Jesus means and how Jesus is to remind us that the Spirit of God is in us too, that we are of God and of the earth, and try to bring us back to God. See, we got the earthy part. We're really good at that. But the divine part we're not so good at. And it's that part that most connects us to God and to each other. I find it really interesting that the Gospel of John spends a lot of time with Jesus saying, I am. In fact, there's 6 of those sayings, right? This is what I am. And they're metaphors, really, for what Jesus can mean to us. He spends a lot of time with Jesus telling people, this is what I am, this is what I mean, and this is what I'm trying to show you. I'm trying to show you that love is in you already. You just have to reconnect with it and then live it into the world. That's how we connect with each other. And he spends a lot of time talking about that. And John's Jesus, of course, in this last speech to the disciples includes some really important things. It reminds the disciples, in fact, those favorite words of Jesus, don't be afraid, because there's a place for you with God. And he tells them how he's the way to that place. And you know the way. He even says, you know the way. And when they say, no, we don't, he says, yes, you do. Because you've been living with me. You've been living the way already. You know the way. Because it's the way that is true. It's the way that's life-giving. The way is love. And he talks even more about that. He even gets yet another one of those I am metaphors about how we're connected. I'm the vine, you are the branches. We're connected. And when you cut a branch off, it affects everybody. When you don't treat the whole vine with care and wholeness and health, everybody suffers from that. Have you not noticed that? And by the way, in case I haven't made this clear yet, love one another as I have loved you. I showed you how to live love into the world. Now go and do that. But then he prays, and not privately, in front of them. In fact, for them and for us. And in that prayer, he says the thing that is so much more important than all the other things. And it's in prayer that he says it. Which ought to tell you the importance and significance of prayer, not simply as, oh God, give us a win, but as how we talk to God, knowing that God is in all things. Because he prays that all may be one. That we might finally understand that it's not just about love and living love into the world. It's about understanding that that very love which is already in us is in each other. It's in all of creation. We are connected. I think one of the reasons we have so much trouble with that is this whole idea of somehow we manage to combine competitiveness and judgment. How can we possibly all be one if I'm better than you? How can we possibly all be one if you're different than me? Because those differences are the things that separate us. We need to find the common ground. If you're, I think this is a little bit cynical, but there are some historians who will point out to you that the main purpose for the United Church of Canada to exist was for those Protestant churches, particularly on the prairies, to get together so that they could act more effectively in the face of rampant Roman Catholicism. Yes, the Protestant churches got together because it was a more efficient way of doing mission work so that they could get ahead of the Catholics, you know. Because they were making great strides, especially out in the prairies. What if there were so many Catholics? Nobody wanted to come to the Protestant churches. We better get on that. Let's get together and do it together. Okay. Part of me wants to say, so what? But okay. Or maybe instead of saying we should get together based on our common beliefs because we need to stand up for Protestantism, instead, maybe we could see the common ground as being the door that opens into something else. Because sooner or later, when you land on that common ground, you have to address the ways in which you got there and how you're different. And there's two ways you can handle that. One is, I don't really want to know. You just do your own thing. We'll get together and do these things when it's necessary, but you just do your own thing. I don't care. Privately, I'm thinking I don't care because you're wrong. But, you know, okay. Or we could go, you know, we could start from here, but I notice that you're really good at this, or you're really good at that, or I don't understand that. Tell me more. Help me get to know you better. I see we've opened the door on it because we all understand this common piece, but I see how we're different. Wouldn't it be cool if we could understand each other's differences and uniquenesses? We could embrace that diversity, learn something from each other, and build something new that isn't just based on our similarity, but is based on our willingness to embrace each other and learn from that. If you have a chance to look up on the internet the inaugural service of the United Church of Canada, you can find the booklet of the day, the order of service of the day. Somebody's scanned an original copy in. And if you read through that, you'll notice this right away in the service when it gets to the part about the hallowing of communion, or of the union, which comes before communion, by the way. But the hallowing of union part, there's a section where it's all of the things that they agree on, the common ground. And then each of the churches coming into union speaks and says, this is what we bring. And it was written especially for the day. If you look this up, you can find it in the service, but then at the end, there's some notes about the service, and it talks about how it was important that they have a place where they acknowledge the common ground and what they are intending to do as a unity, but that each of them brings a very distinct quality to this unity. So each of the Presbyterian, Methodist, Congregationalist, and local union churches, if you're not familiar with what the local union churches are, they are churches that decided to be united churches before there was a united church. Most of them are on the prairies. So there's actually 4 groups at union, not just the 3. And each of them brought something. And here's an interesting thing. Each of those churches brought one of those things: spirituality, discipleship, and justice. It took us 98 years to come up with that slogan, but they had it in the first year, in the service. You're wondering what the 4th one is? It's freedom, the freedom to choose. Because you have the freedom to choose that or not. You can choose to simply acknowledge the common ground that we're on and why we would come together on the similarities, the samenesses. That's not a word, I just made it up, I'm sure, but you get the point. We can either come together just on those things that we're the same at, or we can acknowledge how we're different, and we can embrace that, and we can learn something, and we could grow and build something. That's why I don't think it's an anniversary, I think it's a birth. Because something was birthed. And it was this new union of people who wanted to know about each other. Not just because they were the same, not just because they wanted to compete with somebody else, but because they wanted to know. What's also really interesting, and this is why you should look this up because I'm not going to tell you, is which church brought which one of those things. Because depending on what tradition might be in your background, you might recognize right away where that comes from, but you might not. You might want to know more about how that particular denomination brought that and how it came into the church. Because now it's something very different, isn't it? Because this is what it means to belong. We create something new when we belong because we don't just belong on the basis of, I fit in because I agree with that. We belong on the basis of, I bring something unique and it's honored and appreciated and it affects the body and creates something new. That's what That All May Be One is about. It's not about how we're the same. It's not about uniformity. It's about harmony. It's about acknowledging how we're different and diverse and embracing that and helping to create something new together. Is that easy? No, it's not. And there are many times in the history of the United Church when the United Church has been anything but united on things. Sometimes people have left because we were so not united. But Jesus prays that all may be one, that we might finally understand and recognize how we are connected. And that means being able to appreciate and embrace that we are different just as much as the things that are the same. We are not one just because we're all human beings. We are not one simply because we are alive in creation. We are one because we are connected to that creation. And the way that happens is by embracing each other, not just in sameness, but in our differences and in our diversity, and learning and growing. And then all